Thank you for attending. My name is Liana Rios. I'm with San Diego Gas and Electric. I'm the moderator for this breakout session, and thank you for attending. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our panel. We have Tabitha Willman. She works in the California Air Resources Board Research Division, where her goals are to develop guidance and tools to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, expand resources to enhance local government climate action planning, and to feature them as part of the coolcalifornia.org local government toolkit. We're going to hear more about that. We have Mr. Michael McCormick, who is blessing us with his presence, even though he's on paternity leave. Thank you, Michael. So it is a vacation, isn't it? He serves as an appointee of the governor, as a local and regional affairs policy advisor and senior planner with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, or OPR. His focus is at the nexus of local government and state policy, where he works on climate change, sustainability, tools, resource development, and communication issues. Mr. McCormick has experience working in academic, local government, and consulting capacities, and have been on the boards of several nonprofits, including those of the Sustainability Academy, the American Planning Association, and the Association of Environmental Professionals. We also have Amruta Sudalkar. Did I get it right?
Yes.
Yes. She's a program officer with ICLEI USA. Amruta provides trainings, technical support, and policy guidance to local governments on climate action planning and sustainability planning. Amruta holds a master's degree in city planning and environmental engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So what I would like to do is I'd like to hand it over to Ms. Tabitha Willman, who's going to present us with her slides.
Thanks, Liana. I'm very excited to be here today to show you a little bit about what we at ARB are doing with our local government toolkit, the resources that we have for you guys, and hopefully not just show you some slides, but kind of demonstrate how we are working to collaborate and synchronize our tools at the state level and also with the members of SEEC so that we can give you guys some good stuff to work with. So again, my name is Tabitha Willman, and I work with the Air Resources Board. I work in our research division. It is called Climate Action and Research Planning. So we do a lot of the research and data collection development that goes into collecting the information and also collecting data to help with city climate action planning. So since AB 32 was enacted, we've actually come a long way to better understanding the role that local governments play with respect to implementing the scoping plan. And after AB 32 was enacted and the scoping plan came out, they were very high-level measures that, state agency policy actions that were driving greenhouse gas emission reductions. And I think at the local government level, there was this somewhat mystery as to how can we merge the top-down with the bottom-up, because at the local level is really where you guys and the individuals and businesses are going to be driving actions that achieve those reductions. So over the past 5 years, over 80% of cities and counties here in California are taking action, whether it's looking at reducing their greenhouse gas emissions or whether it's looking at the impending consequences of the climate change, and so they're looking at adaptation strategies. I was excited to hear that potentially there's some funding opportunities coming down the line for adaptation strategies. The fact is, cities and counties are taking action, and that's very encouraging and motivating, and it just means that we, through the SEEC and at the state level, have to really work together to figure out where do we want to focus our energies next. I was excited to hear also through the roundtable discussions how we can help you, because yes, we're here, we're trying to work together to provide resources for you, but we also need to have a good understanding of what your needs are. So to the extent that these types of workshops facilitate that information back to us, that's great. We love to hear that. One of the roles that we have at the state level is helping to facilitate these actions, whether it's working with the local decision makers to understand that they need to take policy action, or whether it's looking at, how do we develop tools to help develop inventories and come up with the strategies to reduce greenhouse gases, or whether it's getting better data. And I know that's something that Michael's been working on, is working with utilities, making sure you guys have the real-time data to make informed decisions. So the goal of today's panel to show you what some of the resources we have here at the state and also ICLEI, and then also to demonstrate kind of how we've been working together, because I think AB 32 being a greenhouse gas reduction touches on so many different things, and they mentioned it earlier that really it has been what has brought state agencies, or at least all of us, together. We're all working towards a common goal, even though we're in different silos. So it's really starting to force us to work together like we haven't necessarily done so in the past. I'm going to start out a little bit by giving you a background on our local government toolkit. In 2007, one of our early actions for the Air Resources Board was to develop resources for individuals, small businesses, and pretty much all of Californians, so that they have the tools to voluntarily reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The primary focus, or the primary way we were undertaking that, is through the coolcalifornia.org website. And we have, the goal of this is to provide resources for all Californians to take action. Some of the tools that we've developed that I won't get into, but that I think are great resources if you have an opportunity, is our carbon footprint calculators. We have an individual one. We also have a small business carbon footprint calculator. So they can give you an idea of what you can go home and do in your daily life to help contribute. So realizing that local governments, businesses, schools, individuals, everyone has different needs, we created different toolkits. And if you go to coolcalifornia.org, you can see up at the top there are different tabs. If you click on local government, you'll get to our local government toolkit. We have customized pages. The purpose of this is to be a comprehensive online resource and to facilitate greenhouse gas emission reductions. So while ARB doesn't have all the tools, we try and link to those who do have all of the other tools, and that's where we've been working really closely through the SEEC and with ICLEI and with OPR to try and give you a resource where you can get to the right places. And you're going to see a common diagram that we've been working with as kind of our motto to making sure we point you to the right direction for each of our tools. We've got information on climate action planning process. We've got links to our climate calculators, as well as a link to our funding wizard, which is really exciting. I'm going to show you a little bit about that. We highlight success stories for California, and we also try and work, I know, Institute for Local Government and League of California Cities. Also, there's a statewide energy efficiency case study coordinator who's bringing this information together. But we have these different links for you. We also work to point you in the right direction, as I was mentioning, whether it's the climate change portal, a central climate change portal for California, or whether it's the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. And that's a key link because it takes you to tying in CEQA as part of your climate action plan development. We also point to the CalAdapt program, which is the California's adaptation portal. So, next slide. So last year, one of the things that we wanted to do was find out, okay, how can ARB best help the process and help you guys? We posed to our local government toolkit advisory group, what are some of the biggest challenges that you have as far as identifying state resources? And one of the main pieces of feedback that we received was that the climate action planning process is confusing in so much that there are a lot of different tools and resources out there, but you don't know where they fit into each of the steps. And depending on where you as a city or county are in the process, you kind of don't know where to go to look for the right resources. So this is one of the things that we tried to undertake, is coming up with we are calling it a roadmap to show where each of the pieces fit in. And throughout today, you're going to see more so in the other presentations kind of where the tools and resources fit. By researching, we found that there's a common process, common 5-6-step process, so we've kind of outlined that, and I'm sure you all are very familiar with that process. But I think what's key is that we've worked through our interagency collaboration to come together with a complete resource. We want to show under which steps they fit and focus on the tools that are free, because that was a big thing for ARB, is we want you guys to have free resources and not have to spend a lot of money. I realize there's going to be money spent on this process, but really we want to give you the tools that you need to go out and do this on your own if you have the staff. So we've incorporated this into our toolkit, and we also have a downloadable version of the roadmap. So under step 1, and I don't want to go so much through the steps, but really kind of highlight the resources that we have in the toolkit. To begin the process of inventorying, both at the municipal and the community level, there are some great tools in the SEEC suite of tools. There are also tools that we point to, like the Local Government Operations Protocol, your standard methodology. So we feature some of those, also links to OPR, and really starting to think about the CEQA process early on. For step 2, we really want to highlight that there are some big drivers and motivators, and a lot of this is in finding what goal you as a city or county should be setting for emission reductions. AB 32, you're probably familiar with the goal 1990 levels by 2020. There's also the SB 375 targets for 2035, and then the governor's order a couple of years ago sets out some really strong emission reduction goals, which are 80% below 1990 levels by the year 2050. And so these types of collaborations, I know through the statewide initiatives and through the work you're doing at the local government level are targeting 2020, but really when you think about what needs to happen to get to the 2050 goal, a lot more work has to be done. So we also include some forecasting tools that SEEC has developed, which I think are great, and Maruta possibly is going to be talking about those a little bit today. And then also point to some of the initiatives that you can use to help support the decision makers in the decision process as far as goal setting and taking action. For example, the Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement and Cool County's Climate Initiative. So under step 3, we look at some of the resources that are going to help you guys evaluate and select your emission reduction strategies. This is important because you have to vet them through the public process and also engage in the CEQA process. And then incorporating those into your general plan and learning how you can make them CEQA compliant. Again, Michael's going to talk a little bit more about that, but this is the step, and then this is what we point to in some of our toolkit. One of the things I want to highlight for you are some efforts that ARB has been undertaking with UC Berkeley. So we've been working with the SEEC to incorporate some of the work that we're doing with UC Berkeley to help support climate action planning decision making. We have been working, like I said, with UC Berkeley for a couple of years to collect information on greenhouse gas emission reductions, not only the quantities, but looking at what are some of the upfront costs, what are some of the long-term benefits, return on investments, really the cost data that's going to help you, cities and counties, decide what to do. ICLEI has some of those tools and has a good framework in place. We want to help improve transparency and I guess provide supporting data so that you can see what the calculations are and you can understand what assumptions went into figuring this out, because sometimes those assumptions need to be changed. So that's what we've been doing at ARB, is working on collecting data. We've got over 90 measures that we want to work with ICLEI to incorporate and help support their tools. The intention is to provide you guys a better tool and to provide you guys transparency and really strengthen and promote a single method of accomplishing this. And I think this was something we heard earlier, is that we want some standards. Cities and counties want not 50 different ways to do things, but kind of some standard guidance. So that's one of the things that we heard that we want to continue to work with ICLEI on. So step 4, where the rubber meets the road. So under step 4, we want to show again, and I'm not going to spend too much time on case studies. If you want to go check out case studies, look at our website. Again, coolcalifornia.org, Institute for Local Government Commission. We all have got some good highlights of what other cities have done, what's worked and what's not. So that's a resource for you. What I'm most excited about is our funding wizard. And this is a new database that we put together. It's a searchable database to find funding for sustainability projects, and there are a couple of ways to search, but really it allows you to look through the different funding opportunities at the federal level, at the state level, and we've also worked with the utilities and Engage 360 to incorporate in some of the, or actually not some, all of the utility rebates. We released it this past year, and we're continuing to expand it, so it's very exciting. I just kind of want to show you a little bit more about it. There are actually 2 ways to search through the database. There is an advanced search, so if you're looking for something specific, you can type into this interface exactly what you're looking for. It asks you for what types of categories, who would be eligible to get it, which obviously you would be local government, and a bunch of different specific questions to get to what you're looking for. There's also a browse function, so once you get in there, you can expand to see, okay, well, perhaps I was looking for something specific, but now I kind of want to look over and see if there's some other types of funding available. So, for example, if you are going to be looking for a grant for sustainable communities, and I use this as an example specifically for you. So you would type in that you're looking for a grant, your local government, and in the search keywords, sustainable communities. This is an example. You would be provided with a listing of funding opportunities. Again, it was intended to be developed for local governments, but it's really applicable for businesses, individuals. It shows, like I said, the local funding opportunities from the utilities. So there are home energy and business upgrades that can be applied. So it's a good resource to point your residents to, as well as your businesses. This actually is updated on a daily basis through what we call an RSS feed. I just learned that was really simple syndication. But it incorporates the grants from the federal grants.gov, as well as information at the state level, state grants. And also, we worked with the California Workforce Investment Board. They produce a business resource catalog, so we've been able to, through a spreadsheet input, get that information in there too. It's really exciting. I encourage you to take a look at it. So this, I think, is one of the most important upcoming areas for all of us to be working on and focusing on, which is basically monitoring and tracking progress. This is critical to the success of your climate planning efforts. You can plan until you're blue in the face, but really getting the programs implemented and then monitoring and making sure that they're working is going to be where we're going to make our successes. The SEEC, I know, this is one of their focus areas, and it's definitely, I know Michael has been working very hard on integrating the data and working with the utilities to make sure that we can help get you the right data and get you timely data, and that it means something. So accuracy and meaningful data are definitely a big focus. And finally, this is kind of one step that we added in, but we felt it was just really important to recognize the success. So cities and counties are doing some fabulous things. And to the extent we can showcase them, applaud them for their efforts, and really show others how they can model what's being done in other areas, this is going to get people motivated to highlight what they've done and even share where there's been challenges, because that is a huge benefit to making what could have been a difficult process easier for another city or county. Some of these are the Beacon Awards. which we're going to hear about. Or actually, I think they're highlighting some of the winners, Beacon Award winners, so that's a great program. I don't want to get too much into what I'm talking about because I know these guys have a lot of good details for you. But I kind of wanted to set up and demonstrate what we've got at ARB, but also assure you that we're working together. We're trying to make sure that our programs integrate and coordinate, and that we're providing you with what you need and not just what we think you need. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to hearing from the rest of the panel. Thanks.
So I'm Michael McCormick with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I've been working on climate action planning for quite some time now, and I probably know 2/3 of you in the room right now, so I'm kind of speaking to the choir, and you've probably heard a part of what I'm going to talk about today already. But a little background on OPR. We were created in 1970. Governor Brown staffed us up very significantly in the late 70s. And we had a great time in the late 70s planning for all things great and wonderful and beautiful: energy efficiency, alternative energy, photovoltaics, electric vehicles. These all may sound very familiar to you. So we've picked up where the policy discussions left off in the late 70s and have gone forward a couple of decades. And so here we are talking about very similar things, but in a little bit different context with much better technology. And instead of slides, PowerPoints. So some of our efforts for 2012, you may think we have more than 13 staff, but we are working on a number of different things, including a CEQA guidelines update for infill, which is just wrapping up. We do an annual planning survey, which I would encourage you to go to the OPR website, and the link will also be posted on the website for the forum as well, to the annual planning survey results. We've pulled together specific information around where people are on climate action planning at the local government level within California. So you get a really good feel for where other people are, and it's also links to their documents. So we had a couple of interns on that for a couple of weeks. So we have a really nice set of information there, particularly if you want to look at other people's plans. All those hyperlinks are all in one place. One of the things that I'm going to talk about in more detail today is the Climate Action Plan Technical Advisory that we're working on, really talking about how to frame your climate action plan in the form of a CEQA streamlining document, but also linking it up to your general plan and talking about the monitoring side of things. We've been doing a few conferences on climate change. April 9th of this year, we did one in LA talking about climate change adaptation. It's one of the big priorities of the governor, and so we're talking a little bit more about extreme weather events associated with climate change. Obviously, this year is a great year to be talking about this, with 50% of the nation in a drought, and others experience massive flooding, and then energy interruptions as a result of overusing the power grid, and power interruptions as a result of those issues. We're doing some coordinated state response to sustainable community strategies, working with ARB, who has the statutory mandate to help move that process forward. But OPR is really looking at it from a statewide collaborative opportunity to help align some of these regional sustainable community strategies and the regional transportation plans with local government priorities. Particularly when we talk about climate action plans, why would we want to do a climate action plan that's completely independent of a regional effort like a sustainable community strategy? We've got a lot of great transportation policies that are going into these SESs, and capturing some of that in the climate action plans is important. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about in a minute here. The Local Agency Formation Commission, we interface with LAFCO on a regular basis. Who in here knows who LAFCO is? Half the room. All right. Yeah, LAFCOs are actually really important because they deal with boundary questions and boundary changes. So whenever a city goes through an annexation or a sphere of influence update, the Local Agency Formation Commission looks at that. And as the regional planning happens, particularly through sustainable community strategies, we're going to see them taking, at least it's our hope, that we would see them taking a little bit larger role in these decision-making processes and consideration of regional planning documents like an SES, so that when they're making decisions on boundary changes, they're considering how far our local government has moved forward in dealing with some of these regional strategies that are in place. The EGPR, the Environmental Goals and Policy Report, really kind of the blanket statement for what the governor's priorities should be at the end of the first administration, the first 4 years. And geospatial data coordination enterprise access, this is something that's really fun for data geeks out there. Allison is going to talk a little bit more about this in the keynote later this afternoon. She's been coordinating on behalf of OPR. And this is a really fun opportunity to get geospatial data linked up with all of this other great data that we have in spreadsheet format and online and in very convoluted structures that nobody understands except for us, which sometimes is a good thing. So model ordinances, electric vehicles, photovoltaics, distributed generation, these are things that various folks at OPR have been working on. You know, as the comprehensive planning agency for the state, one of our responsibilities is to push those resources out to local governments that they really need to do the planning that reflect the governor's priorities. And we're just starting a general plan guidelines update, and as inferenced earlier in the rapid round of convincing you to attend, the general plan guidelines is going to be updated. It was last comprehensively updated in 2003, and there's not a single mention of climate change. So this is obviously going to be one of the big things that we talk about, but it's not just about the structure around a general plan. It's also reframing how we look at comprehensive planning and the timelines we think about planning in. Because climate change is not a short-term issue, it's a long-term issue that we're going to be dealing with for generations and beyond. So we should think about it in a little longer-term context than the typical 20-year time horizon of a general plan. And the Climate Action Plan Technical Advisory that we're writing is really an introduction to what to expect when we're redoing the general plan guidelines. So I'm excited about the conversation that we'll have after this. We have a half an hour for conversation after the presentations, plus or minus? Okay. Then I'll leave a bunch of things blank, and hopefully you guys can fill them in. CEQA guidelines update. Obviously, there's been a fair amount of case law recently, particularly on climate change adaptation and looking at impacts of climate change on projects and communities. There's some mixed signals about whether folks need to look at climate change impacts as a part of their environmental documents. We would say you still do need to deal with it, but we also say you should really be looking at it at the front through your comprehensive planning documents like your general plan. So this is going to be really exciting. Should be a pretty big update to respond to a lot of things that are out there. A lot of things that people that we've been dealing with recently is we're the military liaison for the state. Not a lot of people know that. And as a military liaison, for example, there's going to be a new round of base realignment and closures as a result of some of the budget cutting in Washington. And so we've been working with the military to try to position the state of California well from an economic standpoint, but also from a stability for our community standpoint to retain as many of those facilities as we can. And there's a number of other different things that we do. I think one of the coolest things that we do is we are the handshake mechanism for the state through the governor's office on people that are interfacing with the local government, developing tools and resources for local governments, and really trying to push information out to the public on what the state's doing. So if you've worked with the state, how many of you in here agree that agencies and departments oftentimes release very consistent information and provide consistent guidance across the board? No? Nobody? So one of our jobs is to help create that consistency and make sure people within the agencies and departments are aware of what else is going on. And so we're a part of these conversations within the agencies and departments dealing with climate change, energy, on down the line. So when it comes to OPR, what's our role in climate action planning? Well, we really provide guidance on state law and tools. So one of the things as a planning agency for the state is with the general plan guidelines, we want to make sure that if people are trying to do something that's in conformance, that they feel is going to be in conformance with the general plan, they have the knowledge and understanding to make sure they can make that decision an informed choice. So providing guidance on good planning is part of what we do, and really trying to be a technical assistance organization. Of course, under some administrations, you may not have many people at OPR. Fortunately, under Governor Brown, he sees a high priority in this interface with local governments. And so we're able to provide that technical support. So actually, my phone number and email are at the end of this slide, as dangerous as that is. Feel free to contact me. I'm on paternity leave for another 3 weeks. So really a collaborative partner on tool development, coordination, consistent messaging. And this is one of the things ARB, Tabitha and I have been working a lot on these tool sets that ARB is developing and trying to coordinate with SEEC and ICLEI specifically on making these tools usable for what you guys need them for. One of the big things, because climate change impacts is such a priority of Governor Brown, we are looking at coastal planning, hazards planning, regional planning, and local planning, and how to link them together, particularly from a climate change impact standpoint, because obviously impacts of climate change are not a local issue. They're a regional issue, they're a statewide issue, they're a national issue. I mean, we can go up from there. So really, how's this structure going to work best? And so we've been coordinating with a bunch of the regional entities within the state that are doing adaptation planning. Greenhouse gas inventories, which I'm really going to focus on in the next few slides, is really the pedestal of climate action planning at the local level. And it's one of the reasons why we've put so much focus on it. If you have good data, so we've been working with, so I haven't actually been working with the utilities as much as with the CPUC. Because we're trying to understand through our conversations with the CPUC is how do we get this data in a format, and what's the mechanism by which we can release that data in a standardized format that fits the tools and resources that we have now and that we're going to have in the future. And in our various conversations with folks, particularly LA County, who's been having a challenging time with their data, we've really been inspired to work with the CPUC on creating some of these data release protocols, particularly around zip code +4 data, plus or minus, we'll see. So we're really excited about that conversation with the CPUC. We've got a discussion with the Southern California Edison later this month, and we'll be reaching out to the other utilities as well. So when we talk about greenhouse gas inventories, we also think about, well, what's the reason we're doing this anyway, right? It's to avoid the catastrophic impacts of climate change on our communities. And if we all act together, then we have the potential to do that. But it also creates a statement about the impacts that are going to occur on the community. And so it provides this opportunity to also look at the policies and mechanisms by which we can look at climate change impacts and adaptation. So really, OPR has a vested interest in all of this because we're trying to coordinate the guidance, the resources, and the tools for local governments through the Coastal Commission, through California Emergency Management Agency, through our own guidance at OPR, through the scoping plan, which will hopefully start being updated next year, the adaptation policy guide, the California adaptation strategy, and the insurance commissioner's statements about wanting to have climate change as a priority in his discussions with the insurance companies. So we have a lot of different mechanisms to deal with the discussion on climate change. And we're at this really interesting spot between this year and next year where we have, so for example, the statewide hazard mitigation plan, we have the general plan guidelines, the CEQA guidelines, the local coastal plan guidelines all being updated at the same time. And so we have this unique opportunity to include climate change in all of those, while at the same time acknowledging that emissions reductions should be a primary priority, but that we cannot avoid some of the impacts of climate change that we're already seeing. So we need to deal with those as well. So when we talk about what comes from benefits that come from a climate action plan, I think most of you in this room know what benefits come from a climate action plan. I think local control, really creating, and one of the speakers earlier mentioned this, is prioritizing that financial benefit of our measures. SEEC was streamlining, which ensures development certainty for developers that are trying to develop in your communities. Filling gaps in SB 375. People sometimes forget that SB 375 is really only focused on transportation. And the local governments, in order to really have an effective SES, local governments need to include a response to that regional strategy in their own planning documents. And really, back to this point, we're trying to avoid catastrophic climate change and help prepare communities for those challenges that come from that. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a minute. You saw this on Tabitha's slide. We've tried to make it simpler for local governments to interface with the state. Those of you that have accessed resources from the state in the past, Jillian and I talked about this a couple years ago. Okay, this is one of the reasons why we're doing this, is when we've tried to access resources in the past, there were 40 different ways to get there. And so what we've tried to do is streamline it so that we have a climate change portal. We have the Cool California website through ARB. We have the OPR website and then a resources agency website on climate change impacts and adaptation, which is now being folded into the climate change portal. So that's going to change it a little bit and make it even more simpler. Let me dig right in. Section 15064 of CEQA. Let's talk about climate action plans. We have a cumulative problem. It's climate change. So CEQA says you can deal with this cumulative problem by developing a plan that addresses it. And if you have future projects that move forward that rely on that plan, then your presumption is that development is okay. So that's kind of the baseline. We know that CEQA allows for you to deal with this issue cumulatively. Let's figure out a way to deal with greenhouse gases, which is a uniquely cumulative issue, right? So a couple years ago, 2009, 15183.5 was passed under CEQA to really provide that opportunity for streamlining and tiering for climate action plans, greenhouse gas reduction plans, and other ways to deal with it. For example, you can deal with climate change in your general plan, but if you structure it, you follow the if you follow the guidelines, which you may recognize this is very consistent with ICLEI's 5 milestone process and the six bubbles that Tabitha, bubbles? What do you call those?
Bubbles is fine.
But 6 bubbles, the 6 bubble circle thing that Tabitha put up. So a plan should contain the following elements. You got to quantify your emissions. You got to establish a target, identify what your emissions are from your plan, identify measures to reduce them, and then monitor the progress and amend if necessary, and adopt in a public process. I'm going to talk about these in a little bit more detail. But the things that a lot of people forget about in a climate action plan are the other considerations. CEQA has this thing called other considerations, which is always an important thing to look at because from the environmental standpoint, it's not just about greenhouse gases. You know, climate change is much more than just greenhouse gases. We have to think about the impacts on existing and future development, talking about adaptation, hazards and resilience. What's the relationship with the general plan? A lot of people develop climate action plans in a vacuum, more so in the past than now. I think people are really plugged into how to structure their climate action plans now, particularly because of organizations like this, which bring people together to talk about it. But you know, what's our relationship with the general plan and developing that discussion in the climate action plan itself? Talking about regional planning, which is very often left out of climate action plans at the local level. What's your interface with regional policy? And if you fold in your regional policies into your own climate action plan, you can leverage your relationship with the regional agency to really help fund these programs without staff resources and hopefully with minimal cost as well. And if you can coordinate at the regional level, which I'll talk a little bit more about later as well, regional coordination on climate action plans, but at least coordinating on policy at the regional level allows you to be more competitive on grant applications and really have a more streamlined discussion around how to move forward because you're using fewer staff resources and financial resources to make decisions. Regional planning, water is a big thing. Integrated regional water management folks have been oftentimes working in their own world, and we are trying to bring them better into the conversation because water conveyance, of course, uses 20% of our energy in California, and it's something that we're looking at as a statewide goal that hopefully our local government partners can help us deal with. And then state programs and policies that may benefit or impact a local government's ability to reduce greenhouse gases. So obviously this is something that most people include in their reduction scenarios rather than in their baseline because it helps them achieve their targets. But what we're saying is, time's moving on. And these programs that started up in 2009 and 2010, if your baseline falls after those programs, then you're probably not going to be able to use those state programs that started before your baseline in order to get your reductions. So basically, when you're establishing a baseline, you want to look at a specific geographic area. Most people use city limits or county limits. But we've also seen sphere of influences being used, which is really hard to get data from the utilities on, because they don't cut their boundaries based on SOIs. They cut them on geopolitical boundaries, like a city limit. Urban growth boundaries is another one we've seen used. Again, it's very difficult to get that data because it's not a standardized scenario that folks look at for data availability. So right now we're really recommending people look at those city and county boundaries, regional boundaries that include some sort of understood regional coordination effort, like in a MPO region or a COG region, if you're going to be doing a regional activity. And 2005 to 2008 is what we commonly understand as what's a good baseline year. But like I said earlier, it's kind of getting out of date now. A lot of people are doing 09, 2010 inventories, and these 05, 08. Hopefully, we can talk with ARB about this and update some of these common assumptions around what the baseline year should be. But then also understand that if this changes to 2010 from 2008, then we also have a problem with assuming the state programs that rolled up in 2009 and 2008 can be a part of your can be a part of your reductions, because then they automatically fold in to be a part of your baseline, which can complicate your targets. But at the same time, we're looking for the maximum emission reductions possible, right? So we still want to see those robust targets. So how can baseline emissions be calculated? I mean, we have so many tools out there right now. The hard part is trying to figure out which one to use. We've got a lot of tools and resources. The SEEC tool set is one that, of course, has become sort of the de facto baseline inventory tool. CACP through ICLEI, which is, SEEC, the SEEC tool set and CACP are very similar. Consultant tools from throughout the state, I mean, there's dozens of consultant tools. Consultants have developed their own Excel-based programs to do local government operation protocol-based inventories for municipal operations, and then also the community-wide. And so we're not saying that any of these is better than another. What we're saying is that choose the one that's most appropriate for your community, but make sure it's transparent and replicable. You want people out there that understand greenhouse gases to be able to go into your inventory and replicate it if they want to. And that's part of what we get to with CEQA, is we want to look at substantial evidence as being the basis for an assumption that you've reduced your emissions as effectively as possible. And so that substantial evidence comes from having that information publicly available and accessible. So in the scoping plan suggests 15% below today's levels. That's what we've been recommending for this 05-08 period. And I think that's what we're going to continue to recommend through the Climate Action Plan Technical Advisory. But we really do want to focus folks on the overall emissions rather than on service population or per capita emissions. Because overall emissions, granted, in greenfield cities that are growing quickly, it's hard to get those reductions. But at the same time, if we want to hit our statewide goal for reductions, that's how we're going to do it. If we talk about service population or per capita, those are more appropriate at the regional level. So when we start talking about doing a regional climate action plan, we could also bring up discussions on whether service population or per capita numbers are more appropriate. But at the local level, it kind of lets you off the hook a little bit to do those, because it's much easier to hit your targets, particularly if you're quickly growing jurisdiction. Target years, big question that we get on a regular basis. 2020 is, of course, the AB 32 target year. 7 years away, 8 years away. I mean, that's tomorrow. If we establish a target for 2020 and say, okay, well, if we reach this target, then there's a less than significant impact from greenhouse gases. that's 7 years away. That doesn't even align with your general plan. So it's really short-sighted, because what we want to think about is the long-term goals for emission reductions, the long-term goals for dealing with climate change impacts. 2035, I put a question mark next to it. This is kind of an optional item, but it really helps to align your plan with what's going on at the regional level and with a lot of other programs that are in place to reduce emissions. So if you want to create that alignment with state goals and some of the state programs, this is a really good year to include. And then the general plan build-out year, which right now is, for most people, 2035, which is convenient. General plan build-out year is a really important one because that's what links your document back to the general plan to create that streamlining, the CEQA streamlining possibility. And really the ability to tier future projects by creating a climate action plan that reduces the impacts of your general plan to a less than significant level, you're able to really create a mechanism to create assurance for those future developments in your community. In 2050, I put a question mark by it. Who feels like you can get an accurate forecast for emissions reductions for 2050? I keep asking it the wrong way. Okay, so nobody raises their hand. Yes, you can't right now, really. 2050 is a long way away. There's an acknowledgement that we need to get some technological improvements in place. We will have new state programs that are going to affect emissions. The transportation infrastructure and vehicle usage, vehicle types, they're all going to change significantly over the next couple of decades. So what we want folks to do is really point to 2050 as the end goal. This 80% below 1990 target by 2050 is really hard to hit. We haven't found anybody yet who's been able to hit it using current technology. So set a path for 2050, acknowledging that you're probably not going to hit it. But it really allows your decision makers and your community to see what you're aiming for rather than ending it at 2020, looking at the long-term goal. The other pieces of the puzzle for achieving compliance under CEQA is identifying measures to achieve reduction targets. So, this is pretty straightforward. There's a lot of, well, it's not really straightforward. And when we start talking about sequestration and offsets, that type of thing, I'd be happy to entertain questions on that later. Monitoring your progress, as Tabitha said, this is a huge priority because if you're not actually monitoring your progress, you don't know how well you're doing. We see 3 years as a standard interval to regroup with your climate action plan, but most people are actually reanalyzing their inventories every year, which is really exciting to see because then they're able to really see what their progress is over time. Environmental review, there's a couple different mechanisms you can do to do environmental review. The important thing is you got to do it. Otherwise, you won't be able to get that CEQA streamlining. There's a lot of older climate action plans in place that are really good, but they don't have this environmental component. They may have all the other pieces. But without that, you really can't have a streamlining document. Using with later activities, commonly we see this as a checklist for development proposals that come in. One of the challenges with this is if you develop a climate action plan using your general plan assumptions, you have a project comes through that changes what your general plan is, then you got to regroup with your climate action plan because it changes the assumptions in the cap. So in those jurisdictions that frequently issue variances for their general plan or do general plan amendments, it could be challenging over time to create consistency with the climate action plan. So big things, it's not just about what is required. And people always ask me, what do we have to do to satisfy CEQA? It's not about that. It's focusing what's right on your community, right for your community, thinking about the big picture. Why are we really doing this is to reduce the impacts of climate change. Educate the public and decision makers. CEQA is, most people forget, not a litigation document, but it's a disclosure document. It's meant for education. It's meant for the public to interface in a decision-making process and understand what's going on. And so educating the public and decision makers is a big part of it. Creating follow-through and long-term trajectory, really looking out to 2050 and beyond if possible. And then making the benefits of dealing with climate change tangible is one of the reasons why, and I'm sure everybody in this room is doing this too, is looking at the benefits of taking action on reducing greenhouse gases and improving energy efficiency. And not think about the now, but think about what's coming. just a couple years ago, would we think about the electric vehicle distributed generation infrastructure that's going in right now? I mean, we were making huge progress on this. Think about what you could do rather than what's been done already, and really try to set those stretch goals to make it happen. And again, this is kind of our interface point, and then a bunch of things here that are hyperlinked. This will be posted on the website as well for the guys. Feel free to call me or email me. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Amrita Sudhalkar. I'm a program officer at ICLEI. I'm going to talk about some of the tools and resources that we've developed for each stage of the climate action planning process. So as y'all know, ICLEI's role within this collaborative has been to develop trainings, tools, and technical instructions on how to complete each stage of the climate action planning process. So in general, I think most local governments in California probably have an inventory and a target, but I think a lot of the others are either in the process of developing their climate action plans, and then a few that are in implementation mode. So our goal here is to highlight that we have tools for each of these stages, and I think the 3 or 4 main things that I would highlight about those tools is that they're free for all local governments in California. So they're not just available to ICLEI members, they're available to all local governments in California. The tools are also designed to be extremely user-friendly, and they come with instruction documents and will be supplemented by trainings. So we, over the course of this year, we're going to be providing recorded trainings that give you a high-level overview of how to use each of the tools. And the tools are consistent with each other so that the input or the output from one tool serves as an easy input for the next tool. So the formatting and everything will be fairly consistent. So let's take a closer look at what each of these tools are. So I only have screenshots, and I hope to run through this really quickly. And if we have a little bit of time towards the end, I can do a live demo of one of our tools on climate action planning. Okay? All right, so let's start with milestone 1, which is inventories and forecasts. So we break down the inventory process into 3 stages of data collection, emissions calculations, and emissions reporting. And for for everybody here who has done an inventory, you'll know that the data collection stage is sort of the most tedious and the time-consuming. And so we have tools for each of these stages. So let's take a look at what we have for data collection. So the tool that we have for data collection is the Master Data Workbook. It's an Excel-based tool, and it comes with an instruction manual. And the tool contains separate tabs for you to be able to enter data on each of these sectors that we would include in a community-wide inventory. So typically, you'll have community inventories that are broken down into high-level sectors of residential, commercial, and industrial energy consumption, transportation, solid waste, and so forth. It's basically a worksheet that helps you collect data on residential energy consumption. So you can enter whatever record you have, and then you can enter the quantity of electricity and the quantity of natural gas in the column. So essentially, this tool helps you collect all of the data that will ultimately be fed into the emissions calculator. Okay? For emissions calculations, we have a separate tool where you'll be taking the outputs from the master data workbook, entering them into the emissions calculator, and then it'll give you emissions outputs towards the end. So let's take a look at what the emissions calculator looks like. So the emissions calculator is an online tool. It'll calculate greenhouse gas emissions based on the data that you've entered. For example, if you enter data on the total electricity consumption, it'll give you a total emissions output towards the end. It also has the ability to create charts and tables based on the data that you've entered, and the tool comes with an instructions document. So this is a screenshot of the tool. So this is what it looks like. So if you notice, all of the tabs at the top are consistent with the sectors that we had listed in the master data workbook. So you have sectors for residential, commercial, industrial, transportation, and solid waste. And so you would take the data from the master data workbook, enter the data in the input column, and then it'll give you automatic outputs in the output column. Okay? All right. And then for emissions reporting, like I said, the online tool has the ability to create some charts and tables based on the kind of data that you've entered, and then you can also create your own charts depending on how you'd like to report the emissions. So, for example, local governments often find it useful to report data not just in terms of emissions outputs, but also in terms of how their energy consumption has changed from one year to another, or how they've achieved cost savings based on the greenhouse gas mitigation measures that have been implemented at the different cities. Okay? So this is just an example of a chart that the online calculator creates. And like I said, you have the ability to change this depending on what message you're trying to get across. Okay? All right. So we've talked about inventories, so let's talk a little bit about emissions forecasting, because that is the next stage in the climate action planning process. So normally, local governments will conduct a forecast of business as usual conditions to try and figure out how their emissions would have increased had there been no mitigation measures put in place, right? So for forecasting, the idea is to take the data from your baseline inventory, plug it into this forecasting tool that we have, which is Excel-based, and it'll give you outputs towards the end of forecasted emissions. All right. So we have a separate tool for forecasting, which, like I said, is Excel-based. It calculates future emissions by sector. And the nice thing about this tool is that it accounts for state policies under the business as usual scenario. So earlier we heard about RPS, about Title 24, about there's also policies in the transport sector, so POVLI. So the goal of the forecasting tool is to help local governments determine what they need to do in addition to what state policies will already achieve in terms of emission reductions. So, so the forecasting tool has the option of allowing you to account for those types of state-level policies that will achieve greenhouse gas reductions to some extent. Okay? And the tool that also relies on users to determine sector-based growth, because you'll, as you can imagine, there'll be different growth rates for emissions in the residential sector, and then there'll be different rates in the commercial sector. And residential sector emissions may rely heavily on population growth, whereas commercial sector emissions may rely on how jobs are growing within the community and things like that. So, so the tool has the ability to create separate sector-based growth rates based on whatever is going on in your community. Okay? So this is just an example of one of the outputs that the forecast tool produces. So on the x-axis, you have the different years. The different colors are meant to indicate the different sectors within a community, so residential, commercial, industrial. And then the y-axis shows the emissions. And so this is, these charts and tables will get automatically populated based on whatever data you enter in the forecasting tool. So. So once you have a forecast, the next thing then to do the next milestone then is to establish a greenhouse gas emission reduction target. And then Mike talked a little bit about what kinds of targets are consistent with state level guidance. And so what we've done is we've developed a tool or an instructions document that helps you consider all of the factors that would go into target setting. So when you set a target, you want to revisit your inventory and forecast. You want to review science relevant and policy relevant targets. You want to make sure your targets align with state, regional, and federal directives, if there are any. And then you also want to set short, medium, and long-term targets, because if you think about the long-term target of 2050, it is a little bit overwhelming. So you want to phase it in a way that's realistic. And then normally the way the process works is the target has to be approved by the city council or the board if you're a local government. And so we have this guidance document on target setting that covers each of these bullet points. It's good to have high-level guidance in California at least, and if you look at your local air districts, they'll have a little bit of guidance as well. So that issue of sort of achieving overall emission reductions as opposed to per capita reductions, I think that comes up quite a bit. I work very closely with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and they'll, depending on what kind of growth your community is expected to see, they do provide several different options for how you could define your target. So, but it's good to know sort of what kind of recommendations are coming out of OPR, and that really the goal should be to try and achieve overall emission reductions. So, all right. So now once you've set a greenhouse gas reduction target, the next thing to do is to develop greenhouse gas mitigation measures that could ultimately go in your climate action plan. So again, from a tools perspective, what we have done is, once you have your forecast and reduction target, you can enter those targets and forecasts into your climate action planning tool, and then it'll give you, ultimately the output of the tool is to have a set of greenhouse gas mitigation measures that will help you achieve your target. Okay? So the tool that we have for climate action plan is called CAPA. It's an online tool. It calculates the emission reduction potential of various measures in energy efficiency or renewable energy or transportation. The tool gives instant feedback on the impact of an action as it relates to your business as usual forecast. So the tool will have one graph that shows you your forecasted emissions, and then based on whatever strategies you implement or include in your climate action plan, it'll show you an adjusted forecast to see how you're achieving emission reductions. Okay? And it also allows you to compare different scenarios. So if you have a very aggressive climate action plan versus a not so aggressive climate action plan, it allows you to compare the magnitude of emission reductions under those different scenarios. Okay? So this tool also comes with an instruction document, and here's a screenshot of what the tool looks like. So I picked a specific strategy that could be included in your climate action plan. So this is to do with solar energy. So if you install a certain capacity of solar energy within your community or within your local government operations, so the input would go up there at the top, and then you can enter some site-specific indicators about how that strategy will be implemented, like if it'll be implemented cumulatively, and what the life of that project will be. So will it be 10 years versus 20 years? So you can enter all those inputs at the top, and then the green numbers at the bottom are automatic outputs that you get from the tool. So this is an online tool, and it calculates, you can see at the bottom, it calculates the expected greenhouse gas emission reductions from that specific strategy. Okay? All right. And then we also have a climate action plan template that is available under the suite of resources that I just went over. The climate action plan template, again, we worked with OPR to sort of make sure that the template is consistent with CEQA guidelines, and I think a lot of local governments have found it useful, particularly in terms of making sure that they've covered each step in the climate action planning process. So the template will have chapters on, inventories, forecasting, mitigation measures, and monitoring. So let's take a look at some of the last few milestones in the climate action planning process and what kind of tools we have to cover those. For the local governments that are right now in the implementation stage of climate action planning, they want to be able to measure their progress towards their climate action goals. And often it's difficult to do that. I mean, one way to do that is to do regular inventories at regular intervals. But then you also want to figure out at the individual project level what the effectiveness of your measures is. Like if you have an energy efficiency program for the commercial sector, what kind of emission reductions is that program achieving? So we have some guidance documents that will help you quantify your emission reduction benefits, and also help you monitor your progress towards your emission reduction goals by either looking at it from a project perspective or from a re-inventory perspective. Okay. And then this other document, this other guidance document, it was only, I think, released about a month ago, the City Planners Energy Action Resource Guide. This guide can be used by city planners, and it contains case studies and examples of ordinances or policies that have been effective at the local government scale in terms of reducing energy as well as reducing energy consumption as well as achieving greenhouse gas reductions. Okay? And then in terms of what's coming up next, I mean, I mentioned all these tools, but we're also going to have trainings that'll supplement those tools. So the trainings will be, and they'll provide an overview of the process as well as an overview of how to actually use those tools. So stay tuned. We're going to be releasing trainings, at least 20 plus trainings, is that right, Monica? By the end of the year on each stage of the climate action planning process, as well as detailed trainings on how to use the tools. Okay? And then I wanted to wrap it up with next steps. A lot of local governments that I've spoken with at the forum so far have asked me about the community protocol. And so I wanted to mention that. So ICLEI has spearheaded the development of a community protocol for calculating greenhouse gas emissions at the community scale. And the draft protocol came out last week, and right now it's in public comment period. So for those of you who are interested, I would highly encourage all of you to download the protocol and provide comments. I know a lot of you were interested in how methodologies may have changed for the transportation sector or the built environment or the solid waste sector. So all of that is detailed in the draft protocol, and we would really encourage all of you to take a look at it. And then in terms of next steps, I mean, ICLEI is constantly thinking about how to improve these tools that we've released. And so if you have feedback, we would love to take that into account. I think in terms of next steps, we want to be able to make sure that these tools are maintained, and then any new guidance that comes from the state level, we want to be able to incorporate that in the tools so that they don't become obsolete. And so that's our goal going forward. And I guess we're opening it up to questions at this point.
Just a note on the community protocol, OPR has been working with ICLEI on, as a part of the steering committee on the community protocol, so we're really excited to be part of that process. And we're going to be including a cover letter for California jurisdictions on how to interpret and use the protocol in context with the state of California specific context. So that's not out yet with the draft, but that'll be released with the final.
So who out in the audience has questions about the presentations? And I'll run around and give you the microphone.
Thank you. I have tons of questions for Michael. First one is kind of getting to the regional targets. One of the things that keeps on coming up, we're really close to completing our climate action plan, and we're getting kind of close to, our SEEC strategy on it. But you talked about overall versus regional or per capita reduction targets. And one of the things that is constantly asked of me when I'm presenting to our staff on the climate action plan is, well, we're a priority development area in the Bay Area, and we're scheduled to take on regional growth. We're going to take on more regional growth in order to accommodate people not having growth in the outlying area because we're a first-ring suburb. And we're primarily built up, but we're going to be building out just a little bit more with infill development in order to kind of accommodate that. So from that perspective, if you are taking on if you're doing you're part of the regional strategy to reduce transportation emissions, but you are actually absorbing new emissions in order to do that, how do you kind of deal with that other than at a per capita level?
That's a good question. There's going to be a lot of people dealing with that same issue, and the Bay Area Air Quality Management District is dealing with that question a little bit. One of the things that we're trying to do in the technical advisory is not supersede guidance coming from the regional air districts.
That was my second
because
question.
We don't want to be in a position where state guidance is conflicting with district guidance. So we've actually been working with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District to make sure that there's some consistency there. And we do want to build in some flexibility. And it really comes down to what is the specific context that you're dealing with within your community. And as I said, CEQA is a disclosure document. So if there's a reason to deviate from this advisory, which is just that, it's an advisory, it's not a regulatory document, then that's fine. But just create the narrative around it and make sure that whoever's reading that document understands why you made that decision. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then another one is more kind of specific to kind of what the CEQA strategy is. My understanding is that if you really do kind of want to build a plan, if you want to tier off of a plan, then the CEQA document that you're tiering off of has to kind of, the environmental review document behind it has to be updated. Like it's only good for 5 years, and then you have to like start it all over again. You have to redo that environmental review in order to keep the tiering updated. That's what I've heard. But.
That's only for master EIRs. If you're doing an EIR or a supplemental EIR in your general plan, then you can have it in place for the length of your general plan. If that's the case, if your climate action plan can actually not change for that period of time, and you can achieve your targets, and it looks like you don't need to update your cap to do additional reductions, then it could persist for that entire time period.
And could you get away with just doing an initial study and mitigated neg deck, or do you have to like do a whole full-blown EIR?
It depends. So here, this is a really good point, actually. I'm glad you brought this up. We're going to get together later, though.
Thank you.
Is with a climate action plan, if you're not, one of the reasons we're recommending people do it in line with their general plan update is process as well. Make sure you do the climate action plan, your general plan at the same time. One of the big reasons for that is because if you don't have significant changes in your circulation and land use structure within your jurisdiction, you're not likely to meet any kind of robust target. So if you really want to do a climate action plan that makes a difference, then you're probably going to have environmental changes in your community that necessitate a higher level of environmental review. And so it kind of, it puts you in a tough place because you're doing an environmental benefit document, but the changes that are going to result from that do have the potential to impact the environment as well.
So then the other question is, could you get away with then just putting it into your general plan, like just waiting and tiering off and not really just doing an initial study for your climate action plan and waiting for a full-blown thing as a part of the general plan?
We'll talk about that more later because I want to get your specific context. I want to be careful not to make broad assumptions around that, but I think I want to differ with your use of the word "get away with."
Oh, right.
I think that we encourage. We'd like you to include it in the general plan as much as possible. Even with a standalone climate action plan, there's value to including pieces of the CAP in your general plan and creating a really strong linkage there. The environmental side of it really depends on your specific situation. If you don't need the streamlining or tiering capability right now, you could probably do the CAP and then talk about it in context of the general plan and then do your environmental later. But you're not going to get any CEQA streamlining benefits between now and then. So you really have to have that environmental in place before it becomes a defensible document.
Right. No, our concept was that it would be included in the update. The update is just like 2 years behind the climate action plan. So
we'll talk more. Okay. That's good.
Hi, I had one comment on that and then one question. One issue on that with the general plan issue is I don't think you necessarily have to do a cap in your general plan, but instead, perhaps like what we did in the city of Oxnard, we did a sustainability chapter because we wanted to look at the whole host of environmental and energy-related uses, and from wastewater to a variety of ways. And I don't think you can strictly say an exemption or an initial study or EIR is required. It's really case specific on how much you change the conditions on your baseline. So there's really no answer for one answer for one community. It just varies on deviation from your original project. My comment was, is OPR looking at, or question, pardon me, was is OPR looking at, with the general plan guidelines, mandating a sustainability chapter, or I don't really want to say cap chapters.
Yeah.
my prior comment. So where's that going?
That's a good, to go back to your other question. Really, when it comes to the level of environmental review you're looking at, it has a lot to deal with the comfort of your city attorney or your county attorney, because there is no case law right now that identifies what is a defensible level of environmental review. We have specific recommendations, but there's no case law to necessarily support or disagree with that. On your other question about the general plan, we haven't quite figured out how we're going to recommend inclusion of climate change right now. From an impact standpoint, there's existing mechanisms in the hazards discussions that will obviously tie it into there. From an emissions standpoint, we have to be really careful about the statutory authority we have as a part of the general plan guidelines and not overreach. So we may not be able to create new mandatory elements as a result of that, but we can certainly recommend where things should go. So that conversation is still ongoing, but if you have any recommendations, feel free to give me a holler.
Anyone else for questions?
Name's Javier Marscal with Southern California Edison Codes and Standards Program. Question I have is, a couple of years ago, the Attorney General put out a memo to kind of give guidelines when it comes to complying with CEQA and general plans. A lot's transpired since, I think, 2009, 2010. My question is, right now we're talking citywide, but with SB 97 and the changes to CEQA that occurred 2010, the ideal is CEQA review, looking at GHG reduction on a project-by-project level, and how that fits in with this larger context that we're talking about today. How does that fit in? Because right now, someone trying to pull a permit a planner needs to review it on a project level, and if there is no cap or anything like that, what's a legally defensible measure when it comes to reducing your greenhouse gas impact? Because there is an impact. And again, you hit it right there. There is no case law.
Right.
Is the Attorney General going to write some kind of memo? Because at the end of the day, they're the ones that enforce it. You're advising, but at the end of the day, someone could challenge a CEQA document on that grounds. Where's the case law? Is there any guidance coming ultimately from the Attorney General's office?
Well, the Attorney General's office took a leadership role in climate change as a result of the absence of an OPR discussion and the OPR's inability to provide guidance at that time due to a lack of staff. And at this point, we've been working with the AG's office on the Climate Action Plan Technical Advisory, and we're recommending people deal with greenhouse gases through a programmatic document like a CAP or a general plan, because that's really the best way to deal with it. Case by case is just really challenging. You wind up having situations where different planners are looking at different projects, they're dealing with things differently, they're mitigating it differently, they're creating assumptions around target reductions which may not necessarily be appropriate or consistent with other decisions that were made. So we're seeing the programmatic approach really the best way to deal with it. There is some guidance out there right now on how to deal with it at a project level, and Institute for Local Government actually has a guidance piece out that's very helpful that some of our staff were involved with in their prior lives. And Yvonne Hunter would be a good person to talk with about that. I don't know if she's in the room. But that's posted on the ILG website as well. And it does provide some guidance on project-level guidance.
Steve Frisch with the Sierra Business Council, and I'm asking a non-CEQA question. But not necessarily an entirely pleasant one. So we've made tremendous strides since the passage of AB 32 in 2006. But to move forward, we really have a serious communications problem. And although it might be cognitive dissonance on the part of people that are opposing climate planning, it's real. It's an impediment when it comes to getting local governments to move forward in adopting climate planning. And the dynamic is exacerbated by a 20 to 30% drop in California and local government revenues from the tax base that has moved into staffing cuts of 10 to 20% across most local governments. And decision makers are making decisions in an environment where they have very limited resources and where anything that is highly controversial is difficult to fund. So we can deliver the message that local control is important and planning for public safety and all of these things are benefits, and that there are benefits to local government operations. But somebody needs to be taking the lead in training the practitioners in the communications tools, in the information and the processes that are necessary to bring the public forward in support of those local government decision makers. Who's doing that? What role can state agencies play in doing that? And how do we begin working together, collaborating on training the practitioners on the ground to deal with the communications issues?
Well, it's actually convenient timing that you asked that question. The governor's office has created a communications team internally to deal with just those questions. And we're still working on it. Obviously, there's some challenging discussions out there around the terminology, more so than the reality of this planning. In our mind, this is really just good planning. You know, dealing with climate change isn't something we deal with in a vacuum off to the side. This is something we need to be dealing with through every decision we make, every policy decision, and it's a discussion that should be integrated into our thought process on how communities plan throughout California. And I think we're in a really challenging time now where people push back against changes like this. You know, we've seen similar situations when we talked about regional planning through SESs, where there's a lot of pushback on new approaches to dealing with complicated issues. And I think that's what we're really faced with here is how do we develop the tools and resources to deal with an inherently complicated issue while at the same time changing our approach to planning to respond to that issue. And there's a huge education component to it. Obviously, I don't have all the answers, but hopefully people above my pay grade will have all the answers pretty soon. Like ARB, right?
Yeah, I'd be really interested in hearing everyone's input.
So we are developing a set of videos of experts and real people in the field that are dealing with climate change impacts, that are talking about the issues that climate change has caused in their lives. And those are going to be posted to the governor's office website in the next month or two as we pull those together. And as a part of that, there will be a messaging component that rolls out from the governor's office in coordination with some of the other state agencies. I think to get to your other point about how we do the education and pull other folks in from the local, regional, and NGO communities is we need to get them involved in the discussion following that, because we have some very specific priorities around our messaging for specifically state operations and state policies. But each local government's different. You're going to have to deal with the messaging in a different way for each community. And what works in the Central Valley isn't going to work in North State, isn't going to work in Riverside. But Tabitha will be able to enunciate my thoughts much more clearly.
No, I completely agree. And I think this is an area that ARB would have play a good role, because I think the past, since the scoping plan was implemented, we've worked to try and, I think, not only look at it from a top-down approach with a statewide regulatory measure impact, but also kind of focus on the local government. Again, it's, connecting the top-down with the bottom-up and trying to establish the framework with how to do that. And I think the climate action planning process at the local government level, we've tried to immerse ourselves in understanding that better and then figuring out where ARB has a role in helping. And so to the extent we've been trying to work with OPR and the different state agencies on providing a layout or a common structure and tools to do that, I think this is one of the things that we have a good opportunity to now take forward with the next scoping plan update. I was talking to Michael earlier about really representing local governments better in the next version of the scoping plan, not to, so that you have a better, more prominent spot in a document, but really so that we can understand what are the next challenges. I loved Kate was telling us before the conference that she was going to pose questions to you all about what your needs are from us, because really, we need to hear what the challenges are so that we can align our priorities going forward the next 3 to 5 years. And this, I think, is a big area we can tackle. In our research division at ARB, where I work, we work on the Cool California site. Our job is to facilitate voluntary reduction. So I think the public, as science, people are coming around, but they're still posing challenges to accomplishing planning and implementation at the local level. So through those kinds of efforts, we can help to educate on the science, as well as what folks can do. And as real-time data and monitoring and tracking comes into place, people are going to see energy efficiency and how it benefits them. They may not get the big climate change picture, but they're going to get the economic picture. They're going to get the environmental feel-good picture. And I mean, to the extent that we need to figure out how we target our goals, that's where we have a good opportunity.
And just one quick point on that too is through our efforts over this year and next year, our intent is to include climate change in all of our advisory documents, in all of our regulatory documents, so that when a question comes up about why do we have to do this, there isn't the question of whether you have to do it. It's how do you do it? How do you deal with climate change? And
well, that will certainly help.
And so I mean that's what we've heard a fair amount. We heard that earlier from we need mandates from the state, from one individual, and we don't necessarily want to create mandates to do something a specific way, but we want people to know that certain things have to happen. You can choose how you deal with it, but we do need to deal with the inherent problem. And it's a work in progress, but I think we're going to get there over the next year or two to the point where people feel very comfortable relying on our guidance as a supporting mechanism for action.
So at this point, we are out of time. Excuse me. I'd like to thank all of you very much for attending the breakout session, and how about a round of applause for our esteemed panel?